in terms of what is this panel going to be spending time on, and sort of looking at what are all the different issues that are there in space taxation. Obviously, the biggest issue that we see in any cross-border transaction comes into place even when we get space into the picture, which is taxing space income. How does international law deal with it? How do we deal with allocation of taxing rights over space income? Obviously, having as where there is international tax, transfer pricing follows, allocation of taxing rights, and the potential transfer pricing challenges that comes in, whether it is in respect of issues relating to mining, whether it's going to be on space developed IP, multiple different scenarios that can come in. Not to be left behind is the whole incentive regime around space and in terms of how does Pillar 2 interact when it comes to that. Because the fact of the matter is that we are at a stage probably at a global level where while there is a lot of push to sort of extend our boundaries and look outwards, the fact of the matter is that none of this is going to happen without various incentives that are going to be provided by the government.
It's interesting to see, according to existing tax treaty practice or international tax standards, we can see that some questions might be triggered in relation to the long-standing dichotomy between source and resident states. So new questions could arise on which is the nexus for a jurisdiction to consider that it has a sovereign right to levy a tax on any, let's say, income derived from any activity that may take place in space. So first question, what is the nexus to allow a jurisdiction to tax it? One, we might say, okay, if it is income derived by a resident of one of the contracting states, or one of the states, okay, that's simple, we can tax income derived by any resident. So that wouldn't change, but this following question, which is the nexus for any other jurisdiction to claim a tax liability on that income? That what is used to be the source country. Can a country consider that its jurisdiction might be expanded to also cover the space? And that's the question that might be, we can start asking following Dhwani's comment about the sea. Is there any potential permanent establishment issue that could arise? How long do we need to be carrying on an activity in the space to trigger a permanent establishment? Is still valid the current threshold, 12 months in the OECD, 6 months under the UN Model Tax Convention? Is it a relevant threshold for space activities? We assume that just getting there takes longer than a couple of hours. So shall we consider the moment the rocket has left the Earth and approaching whatever in the space we are trying to get? Those are valid questions for us to design a new tax policy regarding thresholds. And is that threshold, should be that threshold rely on physical presence? A physical presence of what? Some of those spaceships will not be tripulated or might be tripulated from the Earth and it's remote control and there is no physical presence of human beings. So do we need human being present or could be any other type of presence, just the equipment being there? Another question. So those are things that we might start thinking about. Then how we should characterize the type of activities, what is transport, what is the activity itself. Some of them might be taking place at the same time. So exploring and researching could take place at the same time we are transporting. So we might allocate different type of income to different type of participants in any activity. Third type of question. So characterization of the income that might be allocated to one or other party.
Really, the question of taxing income from space activities is really a question of nexus. Which country can claim nexus over either the individual or the person that earns the income or with the income itself? There could be non-residence based nexuses as well. What this nexus is so far is always, for the last 100 years, been decided on the basis of residence and source. But in the sphere of tax treaties, we always think of residence and source as being a binary. But in reality, if one looks at a tax treaty, the word source has not been used at all, except in the second sentence of paragraph 1 of Article 4. And then there is another one which is used in Article 6, which talks about natural sources. It's a geographical source. It doesn't talk about the source of income. So what is source? Source could be anything which is where the nexus is not residence, is source-based taxation. And different countries are free to perceive source the way they want to. There is no international law which says that there has to be a minimum threshold of nexus before you can tax. Of course, you've got permanent establishment rules, etc., but those are bilateral. And the question is, how do you establish nexus? And is this a final frontier? As my panelists have actually already mentioned, this isn't really the final frontier. The high seas and mining activities that happen on high seas, fishing activities that happen, they're all exactly the same issues within the current legal construct as issues of nexus that will present themselves for the outer space. So really, we already have a fair understanding of how it will function. Now, one of the areas, I will not go into all the areas which have already been covered by my co-panelists, but Article 8 I thought was a very interesting one. You could have a situation, what is international transport, where you leave the territory and you might come back to the same territory. That is also included within the definition of international transport. You could go from one country to another country. And this really becomes relevant for either transporting of equipment, goods, or for tourism purposes. There are a number of issues that arise. Now over here, can we really apply Article 8 directly to space activities? Is it air transport or is it beyond air transport? It's quite often that your Soyuz will come back and land in the ocean and you might go to some other country. This is international transport because your journey originated in one country and ends in another country. There would be no doubt. But at the same point of time, would you now say that this is air transport and water transport? There are a number of treaties where the two are covered by the same article. But you have other treaties where air transport is a different distributive rule than is international shipping. Over here, you might have air, space, and water transport. And now you have this new development with the United Nations, bringing in Article 8B, where they're saying if it's just more than casual, nexus with a country, then you can already levy source taxing rights for international transport. Now, it's very important to understand why, in the first place, has Article 8 always given, traditionally at least, exclusive taxing rights to a country, whether it's residence or source, we'll come to that in a moment, is because the international transport business is a highly capital-intensive industry. The profit cycle is extremely cyclical. If you're going to start taxing a Maersk or an AP Moller or any of these international transport companies on gross basis of what they receive, and even if you're taxing on a presumptive basis, quite often it is worse than net taxation, simply because you might be incurring great losses because of great capital investments that are cyclically required in this industry. And the resident state or the place of effective management state of the shipping enterprise might be the only one in which you can actually have deductions available to you. So you could be levying a tax on the basis of the new Article 8 of the UN model on a source basis where there are a number of countries that might perceive source and might tax it and already tax a loss-making enterprise and which might ground the entire enterprise. So the policy questions arising from the international transport through space are very, very important, and whatever rules that are developed will have to address these economic considerations of how capital intensive the industry is, how to allocate taxing rights. My guess would be that it should be exclusive taxation, either on a source basis or on a
Have certain jurisprudence available in India, and which is corely related to the satellite communications. We have some 4 or 5 tax issues out there which are already pronounced or yet to be pronounced, and key issues in the satellite communication is mainly related to on what sort of an income you can identify, whether it is a location of a satellite, which will be a very key thing to identify your income jurisdiction, whether the ownership or operation, in which geography it has been operated, that is the key area, whatever the footprints where are of satellite, or your apportioned turnovers, your assets belong to your employee base, your physical presence, what are there, and what is the control on the content, what are the number of users. All these are very key elements to determine whether it is going to be the income of which jurisdiction, whether it is the next jurisdiction or Y jurisdiction. But very key case laws which have been there from an Indian context. And I would like to bring to the two very famous Delhi High Court judgments. One is with New Sky Satellite, which is a BV company, and the other one is an Asia Satellite Communication, which was a Hong Kong company. The key areas were, okay, you can identify the income, but what is going to be the categorization of that income? Are you going to treat it as a royalty? Are you going to treat it as a FTS? Or they are simply business profits? And incidentally, 916 has been a very important thing where Delhi High Court was very clear on the fact that transfer of IPR is, it only talks about transfer of IPR. Nothing more than that can be termed as a royalty, no matter wherever your transponder lessees are, whoever are the real users, you cannot term it as a royalty. Although in 2012 there has been an amendment, but Delhi High Court was of the view that this is not a retrospective amendment.
The footprint argument is, and that's where it goes into the point around nexus. What is the minimum amount or criteria which is required for the state to impose taxes? And especially when it comes to space, it's going to start getting more and more difficult to determine what is the kind of footprint that's actually left behind. Because ultimately, while we are talking about everything around space, but the reality is that there are activities done within the earth and there are activities which are done outside. And at all points in time, we are thinking about what is done, what is the degree of nexus within a particular state, which brings it within the tax net. So that I can see it be a difficult issue.
Satellite communication is something which is a reality, while asteroid mining or space mining is a rather futuristic perspective, something that we may see in 2040 probably. The biggest issue that would arise in case of a situation where there is a mining equipment in a particular state, launch from a particular state, let's say US, and the processing and sale of the asteroid that has been mined back at Earth would be from state C, given that these are three or more different jurisdictions involved herein, it would definitely have a primary impact onto the nexus or the source as to where and which country would have the right to apportion the profits that may be generated pursuant to such a transaction. The next discussion would rather be as to ascertaining how would you find the comparables or the benchmark required to primarily quantify an asteroid that has been mined in India.